Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about the secret to extended fasting. And extended, of course, means longer. So this is anything beyond 16 to 24 hours. A lot of people who do intermittent fasting, they'll go anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. I probably go on average about 16 hours a day without food. But extended is when you go longer than that. So if you have dinner at 6 o'clock and then you skip the whole next day, when you wake up the next morning, you have about 36 hours without food. If you wait till lunch to eat, now you have about 42 hours. So I think that would be a pretty good place to start, and then you can work up to it from there. So if you do 42 hours, your first time, your first extended fast, then next week or a couple of weeks later, you could go a little bit longer. And then as you learn how your body responds, you can work up to maybe 3, 4, 5 days. And some people want to go longer than that, more than 5 days, up to a week or even 2. But if you do that, I would strongly recommend that you have some medical supervision so that you can check what's going on with your body to make sure that all your markers are okay. But there's also a reason I don't think that you need to do that, and it is that I believe you get most of the benefits of fasting anywhere from 2 days up to about 5 days. And those benefits are quite numerous. They include, of course, weight loss because you drop insulin, and when you're not eating, your body has to burn fat off the body. But also, there's something called autophagy. So even people who don't need to lose weight, they do some fasting for the purpose, for the benefit of autophagy. And this is where your body changes a lot of its biochemistry. Resources become scarce, and your body gets better at recycling and using resources that are already in the body. So it will tend to reduce inflammation. It will tend to give you an immune boost. And it will also help you with brain repair. So if you have some brain inflammation, some brain fog, or if you've had a concussion recently or sometime in the past, then autophagy and fasting is the most powerful way to help the brain to clean some of that stuff up. Another reason why a lot of people do longer fasting is for longevity. So when you go a little bit longer without food, now you start to upregulate your survival genes. They're called sirtuins. And with anywhere from 2 to 5 days, you're going to dramatically increase those sirtuins and contribute to better longevity and higher quality of life. And the greatest benefit that would affect the most people is that it's the fastest way of reversing insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And if you can do that, now you're going to start affecting things like high blood pressure. It's going to start coming down. Your risk of stroke, your risk of cancer, your risk of cardiovascular disease are going to come dramatically down. And also not to mention that type 2 diabetes is the #1 risk of kidney failure and blindness. So you're going to dramatically reduce all of those. But with all those benefits, why isn't everybody doing longer fasting on a regular basis? Because there are some obstacles. And the first one is ignorance. We're told that we have to eat all the time. You must eat breakfast. You must eat 3 square meals. You must have frequent snacks and top off your blood sugar every couple of hours. So we've been indoctrinated. And if we're used to that, if we've never missed a meal, or never missed a day of meals, then it's kind of scary with the idea of not eating for a couple of days. So we need to understand that it's perfectly safe, that your body is built to go without food. It's called feast and famine. It's a natural balance that actually benefits the body. Another reason would be fear. People don't like discomfort. They're afraid of hunger. They're afraid of the unknown. So they think that they're going to get super hungry. They don't know that you get a little bit hungry and then it passes. So it's not really a big deal, but it is a fear that people have to come over and find out that it's not so bad. And then there is this thing called keto flu, which happens when you either go really low carb like keto or you start fasting. Now you can get certain unpleasant symptoms like fatigue and weakness, maybe brain fog, maybe irritability, and then some physical symptoms like headaches, nausea, and poor sleep. So even though there's growing evidence of the benefits of fasting, these are the things that keep people from trying. But here's what we need to understand, that you can make it so much easier if you understand what we're going to talk about. And the key to successful, comfortable long-term fasting is electrolytes. Another word for electrolytes is minerals. And it's minerals that we use in large quantities. We need to consume them hundreds of milligrams or even several grams per day, whereas trace minerals we use in tiny, tiny amounts like single milligrams or even micrograms. And think of minerals as charged particles, and because of this, they conduct electricity. This is primarily what the body uses them for, and they participate in all the nerve signaling in the body. They're also involved with regulating fluid balance through the kidneys, and also pH balance also through the kidneys primarily. And this is basically why you feel bad when you're fasting, is if you're losing some of these electrolytes so that you can't regulate your nerve signals and your fluid balance and your pH properly. And here's why these factors can change when you start fasting and keto. So when you eat less, and especially when you eat less carbohydrates, now you start using up a little bit of the stored carbohydrate that you have. And that's called glycogen. Glycogen also binds with water. It's like a sponge. So 1 gram of glycogen is going to hold on to about 3 to 4 grams of water. And then when you burn up the glycogen, there's nothing to hold the water. So it becomes extra, and you start losing that water. You go to the bathroom and get rid of it. So the first 3 to 4 pounds of any diet is going to be water loss from using up glycogen. And here's why some of these factors can start changing. There's 2 big reasons, and here's the first one. When you start fasting in keto, you're going to start using up some glycogen. And glycogen is stored carbohydrate. You can store it in your muscles, you can store it in your liver. And what most people don't realize is that glycogen binds water. It's like a sponge. It just holds water to it. So as you start using up the glycogen, you also start losing the water because there's nothing to hold it. The sponge is gone, so the water just kind of leaks out. And you can hold about 1 pound of glycogen in your body, so that glycogen is going to hold on to about 3 to 4 pounds. So as you burn up your glycogen, the first 3 to 4 pounds of weight loss of any diet is going to be just plain water because the glycogen is gone. But then we need to understand that sodium always follows water. Sodium is the primary electrolyte in the extracellular fluid, which we'll talk about in a second. So as you're losing some water, you're also losing sodium with it. They always go together. And this is the first big reason that you can start getting electrolyte imbalances and start feeling bad when you do keto and fasting. So sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium are the 4 big electrolytes that we need to be concerned with. So glycogen is the first reason that we can get loss and imbalance of electrolyte when we do fasting and keto, and why we feel bad like keto flu. The second reason has to do with insulin. And think about it this way. Why do so many diabetics have high blood pressure? Why do they go hand in hand almost always? And that is because when insulin is high, which it is in diabetics, now the kidneys are going to have a greater tendency to reabsorb sodium. It's going to reabsorb it to a higher degree, and therefore we keep more sodium. Sodium pulls the water with it, and now we get that hypertension, that high blood pressure. And now when we start fasting or keto, what happens is that insulin is going to start dropping. And fasting is one of the most powerful ways to reduce insulin quickly. So naturally, if high insulin keeps more sodium in, then less insulin is going to start letting go of some sodium. So there's less sodium reabsorption in the kidneys, and now we lose further electrolytes and further water. So let's go through these 4 major electrolytes. The first one being sodium. And sodium is the most plentiful electrolyte. It's the one we have by far the most in the extracellular fluid. So what that means is we have this organ, and here's a blood vessel running through this organ, and then we have cells in this organ. So obviously inside the cells, that is intracellular, and everything else is extracellular. So a lot of times we talk about blood glucose going from the bloodstream and into the cell. Well, when we talk about electrolytes, everything that's not inside the cell is extracellular. So the bloodstream and the cell, all of this is extracellular. And here is where the sodium is the dominant, by far, dominant electrolyte. So it's going to determine the blood pressure and the amount of fluids and the fluid regulation in that extracellular fluid. So sodium is the primary factor in fluid regulation, but it also is a key to nerve signaling and to muscle contractions. So some of the symptoms that we get if sodium gets too low are things like headaches. A lot of that has to do with loss of water, but we can also get dizzy and we can get severe fatigue. So the next step to understand when it comes to sodium and potassium is something called the sodium-potassium ATPase pump. And what does that mean? It means it's pumping sodium and potassium in and out of cells, and it uses energy. It uses ATP to do it. This is a costly process. And I'm mentioning this because I think it's important to understand that we have such a pump, but also that about 1/3 of your calories, of all the calories that you eat, if you eat 3,000 calories, then about 1,000 of those calories go directly and only to fueling this sodium-potassium pump. That's how important it is to regulate these ions and these minerals. So looking at this picture now, this would be the outside of the cell, this would be the inside of the cell, and this is called a lipid bilayer. So these little round heads here, they're phospholipids. They kind of mix a little bit both with water and with fat, so they're kind of bipolar. But these inside here, they are the fatty acids, and they are hydrophobic. Water and oil don't mix. So the fat, it turns inward against each other. And this is how all cell membranes in the body are designed. It's a lipid bilayer that determines to keep the inside and the outside separate and determine what is allowed to pass. And every time this pump cranks one turn, we're going to move 3 sodiums out and we're going to move 2 potassiums in. And this is just the way this works. And this is involved with all nerve conduction. It's involved with the kidneys regulating sodium, potassium, and fluid. This is one of the primary pumps in body physiology. So obviously the next one then would be potassium. And now potassium is the most plentiful intracellular. So most of the sodium is floating extracellular, but because of this pump that cranks the potassium back inside the cells, now potassium is mostly inside cells. So on every little surface here, we would have these little potassium pumps, and there's thousands of them, and they crank hundreds of times per second. So what the sodium-potassium pump also does is it moves electrical charge, because every time it churns, you're moving 3 sodiums and 2 potassiums. Each one has a positive charge, but the net difference is every time it cranks, it is pumping a positive net charge outside of the cell. And this is the foundation for all of the nerve signaling in the body. When your nervous system sends signals, this is exactly how that happens. And it is also key to muscle contraction because, first of all, the nerve signal has to send a signal to the muscle to contract, and that uses this sodium-potassium pump for this propagation. But also inside the muscle, we have electrolytes that make the muscle actually contract on the inside. Now, potassium, more than any of the other electrolytes, it's important to understand that you can get severe symptoms. It can be life-threatening if it is too high or too low. So either way, you can get symptoms like muscle cramping, muscle weakness, and irregular heartbeats. As you probably know, the heart is a muscle, but it's very different from other muscles in the body because other muscles, while they have a basic muscle tone, they don't really do anything. They don't move until the brain sends a signal to tell them to do something. But the heart, it generates its own signals. It needs to beat at a steady baseline rhythm. So it has its own pacemaker and it has its own base rate. Now, the nervous system, the fight-flight sympathetic or the feed-breed parasympathetic, it can speed up or slow down the heart with nervous system activity, but the heart doesn't stop. It always has that base rate. So this makes it a little more sensitive and more the influence of potassium. So normal potassium would be 3.5 to 5.2 milliequivalents per liter. But if it starts falling a lot below that, now we get what's called tachycardia. The heart actually speeds up because there's less of a braking influence. And in extreme cases, this can lead to what's called ventricular fibrillation. So the heart starts beating so fast that it doesn't have time to fill. So it's just kind of flapping in the wind. The blood doesn't have time to get through, and now we're losing the efficiency. We're not really pumping blood. The heart is just beating without getting any liquid through. And this obviously can lead to a heart attack. So anything less than 2.5 of potassium is considered life-threatening. But then the opposite of that is high potassium, which actually slows down the heart. That's called bradycardia. And in extreme cases, if you have enormously high potassium, the heart can actually stop altogether. So once your levels start getting up over 6.5, 7, 7.5, now that is also considered life-threatening because your heart could actually stop. Now, both of these scenarios sound pretty scary, but realize that it takes a lot to get the potassium that far out of range. And if you have functioning kidneys that can regulate minerals and fluids, then you're not probably ever going to have a problem that extreme. But this is something definitely to watch for if you have some serious kidney problems. Magnesium is an incredibly important electrolyte, and we test it routinely on all the blood work that we do. And I'm sad to say that the majority of people we test probably are deficient, or they have less than an optimal level. And magnesium is super, super important. It is involved with hundreds of different enzyme reactions. It's a cofactor. So if your body makes protein or hormones or different tissues and it puts things together, then it's an enzyme that fits these different amino acids together, and magnesium is the cofactor that makes the enzyme work. So therefore, it's part of nerve signaling, it's part of muscle function, and even part of blood glucose regulation. If our levels get really low, then we can experience things like nausea, weakness, and muscle cramping. And this is one of the most important ones for muscle cramping. And magnesium is also known as a calming mineral because the presence of enough magnesium helps stabilize the charge of that, the electrical charge of that membrane. When the sodium-potassium pump cranks, then magnesium reinforces the stability of that membrane. The fourth big electrolyte is called calcium, and everybody knows, of course, that it's involved with bone health because it mineralizes bone. If we don't have enough calcium long term, we get osteoporosis. But what most people don't realize is that the body prioritizes calcium in the blood short term. So long term, we got to have it in the bone. Short term, we have to have it in the blood. And that's even more important because of nerve signals and because of muscle function, muscle contractions. So there's a tiny gland called a parathyroid that makes a hormone to pull calcium from the bone. And that is more important minute to minute, second to second, to regulate the blood levels of calcium so that the nerve signals and the muscles work. So if we see low calcium on a blood test, that probably has more to do with parathyroid function than it does with your dietary intake of calcium. But still, calcium can be low, and some of the symptoms that could happen are things like muscle spasms or numbness in hands and feet, and it can even influence things like depression and anxiety. So remember that the keto flu and the symptoms and the problems with fasting turn up because we lose water and we lose or we get an imbalance of electrolytes. So the solution then is we need to add both. If you only drink water and you've already lost electrolytes, chances are you could make the problem worse. So it's super important to understand the balance here. And then once we add them, now we need to maintain the balance. We don't want to just gulp up tons of one mineral and ignore the others. Now, where do we get these minerals, these electrolytes? Well, first of all, we need to know that most people are deficient. Most people don't get enough. And the single biggest reason for that is that we eat junk. We eat so much processed food. 70% of calories come from white trash, which is white sugar, white flour, and these processed dead vegetable oils that have no nutrients, no minerals whatsoever. And just a little reminder for you that friends don't let friends bring home white trash. Just don't do it. Learn what real food is, and that's what you bring home. Now, if you're only doing like standard intermittent fasting, like 16 to 24 hours, now the food is going to provide the vast majority of minerals. If you eat enough fish and meat and chicken and vegetables such as non-starchy vegetables, there's tons of minerals in that food. So you're going to be okay. However, like we said, you're lowering some insulin, you're changing some things around. So it's a good idea to supplement because, again, most people are a little bit deficient to start with. So some supplementation can come in handy, especially if you're exercising, especially if you have hot weather, if you work outside, you're going to be losing lots of water and you want to replenish both water and electrolytes. But the most important time to really supplement is if you're doing extended fasting. If you're going longer, like 36 hours up to 5 days, now you're not putting any electrolytes back in. So short-term fasting, you're getting some of it from the food you're eating. When you're not eating any food, you're losing minerals, but you're not putting any back in. So it's super important. And this is the biggest reason why people sometimes feel bad when they're doing longer fasting. It has much more to do with the electrolytes than the fact that you're not getting calories. Which brings me to a little announcement. So I'm super excited to announce that I have developed my own nutrition brand, my own supplement brand. It is called Euvexia, and I thought long and hard about that name. I worked on it for a few days, and what it is, it's Greek. It's a combination of two Greek words where E and U is like the prefix in euphoria. It means good and true. And Evexia means wellness in Greek. So basically what this word means is true wellness. And when I figured that out and what I stand for, I just felt it was the perfect name. And then we came up with this gorgeous logo, which is an E, which is obviously E for Euvexia, but also E for Ekberg. And the first product we will launch in a few days is called Eulite. And so it's a true electrolyte, basically. So why did I develop Euvexia? Well, first of all, realize that I made videos for 13 years. And during that time, I built the channel to about 3 million subscribers. I get dozens of requests to promote products every single day. And I've turned them all down because I want to keep the message pure and honest. I want to stand behind something. If I recommend something, it should be something that I use personally or in the clinic and that I found really works on people. Now, here's the problem. Almost every day, people bring in products supplements that they found online. They heard that they were good for something. They saw an ad someplace. And they ask me, what do you think of this? And my answer is always the same. I don't think anything. I just test it. I use muscle testing and I check it to see if this product is any good for that person. And it really bothers me how many bad products are out there. The basic idea in medicine and in healthcare is, first of all, do no harm. So if you have something useless, that's all right, but you shouldn't have things that are harmful. And some of these electrolyte products, some of the worst, they even have sugar in them, some big brands. Now, most people doing fasting are trying to lower their blood sugar, to stabilize their blood sugar, and then they take an electrolyte with sugar in it. Breaks my heart. Another problem is that some of these powders have wimpy doses. They hardly contain anything useful, and oftentimes if they do, then there's mostly one. They have maybe either potassium or sodium because they're the cheapest to put in there. Another big problem that goes back to this thing about first do no harm is that almost everything has natural flavors and natural colors in them. And this could be okay or it could be really bad. And most of them are really bad. There's many thousands of chemicals that have been approved under the heading of natural flavor, natural color that are actually harmful. And of course, the cheap ones are the ones that they use, and they're typically the harmful ones. So when I muscle test, I find that 9 out of 10 products, whether they're capsules or powders or whatever, they don't test well at all. They test as harmful. And when it comes to electrolytes, I have yet to test a single one that people bring in that doesn't test as harmful. And most of the time it's because they have some cheap version of a natural flavor or natural color in there. So quite frankly, I developed this product because I needed something that works, that I could recommend to you and to my patients. I wanted something with substantial amounts of the stuff you need. I wanted something that was balanced and comprehensive. And most importantly, it must pass muscle testing. I'm super excited about bringing this product to the market. And if you'd like to know more about it, then I'd love for you to join me on a live stream that we're doing on Wednesday, June 7th. If you like this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.